It's season 36 in Identity 5, and there's a new side story kicking off alongside it. This time, NetEase has teamed up with the Conan Doyle estate for a Sherlock Holmes collaboration. You'll get to play as iconic characters like Sherlock Holmes, John Watson, Inspector Lestrade, and Professor Moriarty in their own unique side story within the game. Now, not every fan is diving straight into the side story gameplay. Many are just after the rewards. In this video, I'll break down everything you need to know about what's happening in the side story. The crossover unfolds through the eyes of Alice DeRoss, who assumes the identity of Celia Watson, a relative of Dr. Watson. The story revolves around Ethan Bevel, a prominent art collector found dead in his manor, supposedly due to a cursed painting. What seems like an accident might actually be a well-disguised murder. NetEase is rolling out the story into 2 parts, with the next installment expected after next week's maintenance. So, stay tuned. This is your host, Silmina, and let's delve into the story.
So all life is a great chain, whenever we are shown a single link to it. A clever and elegant lady. Alas, she was not cautious enough, revealing a slight flaw. The passing gentleman, an astute appreciator of art. Tastes like bitter almonds. And of course, the keen Mr. Hound, not to be outdone, expounds, once you eliminate the last impossible. Here it is. This is the link. Cerberus has already shown me the truth.
At the start of the story, we are introduced to Celia Watson, who is actually Alice DeRoss in disguise. For reasons that remain unclear, Alice has assumed the identity of John Watson's distant cousin, a person who may not even exist, and has made her way to Holmes's residence and office at 221B Baker Street. Celia arrives at Holmes's office while John Watson is away from London. Upon entering the apartment, she notices that Holmes is absent and begins exploring. She quickly observes his deep interest in music and science. However, she is soon startled when Holmes suddenly appears and asks if she, too, enjoys music. After a brief introduction, Holmes invites Celia to assist him with a case at Bevel Manor. The manor is said to be cursed, not by the building itself, but by a mysterious painting known as the Wrath of Cerberus. As Holmes and Celia discuss the case, a young, boyish-looking woman enters the room. She is Wiggins, Holmes' assistant, who has been making the necessary arrangements for the trip to Bevel Manor. She will also serve as the carriage driver for the journey. Holmes introduces Celia to Wiggins in a way that suggests he may already be aware of her disguise, though Celia remains unsure. After their brief introduction, Holmes and Celia leave 221B Baker Street and board the carriage, preparing to set off for Bevel Manor. Inside, Celia begins reviewing the case notes written by John Watson himself. The story then shifts backward as we dive into the case notes. On a particular day, John Watson, Holmes' close friend, and perhaps his only true friend, arrived at 221B Baker Street and noticed Holmes engrossed in a catalog from Bevel's art gallery. The name immediately rang a bell for Watson, as he recalled reading about Ethan Bevel in the newspaper. Bevel, a well-known art collector, had met an untimely death, and his family had long been rumored to be plagued by a curse. Holmes confirmed Watson's recollection and pointed to a newspaper on the table with details about the incident. Watson picked it up and began reading. According to the article, Ethan Bevel was a wealthy art collector and painter with a deep passion for discovering young artists. He had converted half of his family estate into an art gallery to showcase his prized collection. However, not long ago, Bevel was found dead at his mansion, having fallen from the stairs. The police were still investigating the exact cause of death. Following his passing, a particular painting from his collection, The Wrath of Cerberus, had become the center of attention due to its rumored curse. Legend had it that anyone who possessed the painting would meet a mysterious and untimely demise. Bevel's sudden death only fueled the intrigue, with eager collectors now offering vast sums to acquire the supposedly cursed artwork. Holmes then revealed that, prior to Watson's arrival, he had met with the butler of Bevel Manor. While many, including the estate staff, believed that Bevel's death was caused by the painting's curse, the butler remained skeptical. Unconvinced by the superstition, he had sought out Holmes's help in uncovering the truth. Holmes, intrigued by the case, had agreed, and naturally, he dragged Watson along with him. Bevel Manor was an isolated estate located near a swamp on the outskirts of London, making access difficult and inconvenient. It was a peculiar choice for an art gallery, raising questions about why someone would build one in such a remote location. However, its eerie setting only fueled the rumors of a lingering curse. Upon their arrival, Holmes and Watson were greeted by the Manor's butler, Laverne, who was visibly relieved to see them. He led them to the reception room, where Watson took a moment to observe his surroundings. Among the many artworks and decorations, his attention was particularly drawn to an unfinished painting standing nearby. Shortly after, Laverne introduced them to the Manor's maid, a young woman named Dahlia. One thing about her immediately stood out: her clothes were noticeably dirty. Watson also recalled that she was the one who had discovered Bevel's body. When Holmes inquired about how she had found him, Dahlia explained that every morning she would bring breakfast to Bevel's room. However, on that fateful day, he was nowhere to be found. This wasn't unusual, as he had recently been spending his mornings in the exhibition hall. Assuming he was there, she went to check, only to discover his lifeless body. Laverne added that Bevel's death had affected Dahlia the most. Bevel had no children, but he often mentioned how she bore a striking resemblance to his late niece, with whom he had been really close. The butler then suggested that if Holmes and Watson truly wanted to understand the case, they should follow him to the exhibition hall, where the police were already investigating. Holmes smirked at Watson and remarked that the officer in charge might be a familiar face. Upon arriving at the exhibition hall, Holmes and Watson were greeted by the lead investigator on the case, none other than their old acquaintance, Inspector Lestrade. In addition to Lestrade and his team, the Bevel Gallery's curator and manager, Mr. Clovis, was also present. Clovis was there to oversee preparations for an upcoming art exhibition and the sale of the so-called cursed painting, The Wrath of Cerberus. Lestrade questioned Clovis about why he still intended to go through with the exhibition, despite the painting's sinister reputation. Clovis explained that invitations had already been sent out, and several secret buyers had placed their bids. He added that Bevel himself had been eagerly anticipating this event, so canceling it after his death would go against his wishes. Lestrade then concluded his investigation, stating that there was nothing suspicious at the scene and that Bevel's death was most likely an accident. Holmes, however, wasn't convinced and requested access to the investigation and autopsy reports. Though visibly annoyed, Lestrade complied. According to the report, Bevel had died at around 2 a.m. on February 11th. Holmes then requested testimonies from those living in the manor at the time, Clovis, Laverne, and Dahlia, about their whereabouts during the incident. Clovis stated that he was in the city, making preparations for the exhibition. Laverne claimed to have been in Bevel's bedroom, and Dahlia mentioned that she had gone to visit a relative who happened to be a magician. Based on their statements alone, all three appeared to have alibis. Watson reviewed the reports and noted that Bevel's cause of death was a blunt force trauma to the back of the head, consistent with injuries sustained from falling down a flight of stairs. However, the autopsy also mentioned a skin condition linked to an acute allergic reaction, an unusual detail that stood out. Additionally, the report described the exhibition hall as a completely sealed space designed to prevent theft. It had no windows or ventilation openings, and soundproofing measures had been installed. Holmes declared that it was too soon to conclude that Bevel's death was accidental. He requested 3 days to gather evidence that could uncover the truth. Clovis was clearly displeased, but Lestrade reluctantly agreed, allowing Holmes the time he requested. With that, everyone left the exhibition hall. Once outside, Laverne approached Holmes privately. He admitted that he didn't believe in the curse, but had his own suspicions about the case. However, with Clovis present, he dared not speak openly. Laverne then asked Holmes for his thoughts on the possible culprit and motive. Holmes speculated that the motive might be linked to an inheritance. Since Bevel had no direct heirs, his fortune would either be donated or divided among his business partners. Laverne seemed surprised, but later mentioned that Bevel's will was scheduled to be read the following day. The reading would be attended by himself, Clovis, and a certain art dealer who would act as a witness. Holmes inquired about the art dealer, and Laverne explained that he was someone who had frequently done business with Bevel. However, the man currently resided in Switzerland, so it would take a few days for him to arrive. Before leaving, Holmes noticed the same unfinished painting that Watson had seen earlier in the reception room. He asked if Bevel had been working on it, to which Laverne replied that it wasn't Bevel's work, but Clovis's. He further explained that Clovis specialized in landscape painting, whereas Bevel focused on animals and replicas. Holmes instructed Laverne not to let anyone move the painting and stated that he would return after the will had been read. With that, the flashback ended, bringing us back to Celia Watson, who was on her way to Bevel Manor alongside Holmes and Wiggins. Celia asked Holmes about the results of the will reading, to which he explained that Bevel had left his entire fortune, excluding the exhibited artwork, to Laverne, the butler. As for the Wrath of Cerberus, the proceeds from its auction were to be fully donated to a charity supporting young artists. Holmes then mentioned that, just before Celia had arrived, Laverne had come to him with a disturbing report. The hellhound, the fiery dogs from the painting, had supposedly appeared again the previous night, and this time, Laverne claimed to have seen it with his own eyes. Upon arriving at the manor, Laverne wasted no time, leading Holmes and Celia straight to the exhibition hall. Waiting for them inside were two familiar faces, Inspector Lestrade and Clovis, and one unfamiliar face. It was Roy Ramit, an art dealer who had served as a witness to Bevel's will reading. Holmes briefly introduced Celia before shifting his attention to the infamous painting. Laverne recounted what had happened after the will reading. He had escorted the guests to their rooms before returning to his own quarters for the night. However, upon arriving, he found an ominous letter slipped under his door, supposedly a warning from Cerberus itself. Lestrade handed Holmes the letter, who then passed it to Celia for her to read. Following the letter's instructions, Laverne had gone to the exhibition hall at midnight. What he witnessed was beyond explanation. He swore he saw the dogs in the painting spewing flames. Yet, when he looked at the painting again, something felt different. He turned to Dahlia, the maid, and asked her to confirm his suspicions. Dahlia paled in horror and shakily admitted that the painting did indeed look different from the one displayed the night before. Holmes turned to Dahlia, asking why she had come to the hall at that hour. She explained that she had rushed over after hearing Laverne's terrified scream. Laverne added that the sight of the flaming dogs had startled him so badly that he nearly fell down the stairs. Fortunately, he managed to grab onto the railing just in time, and Dahlia had arrived moments later to help him. Celia, recalling the supposed legend, remarked that according to what she knew, the curse of the Wrath of Cerberus only targeted the guilty. Roy, however, spoke up, stating that there was an older version of the legend, one that might change their understanding of the curse entirely. He then proceeded to recount the origins of the Wrath of Cerberus.
The Bevel family has long been a noble presence in this swampland, but in recent years, their wealth has surged, largely due to their impressive art collection. However, not so long ago, they were known as a notorious gang of thugs, infamous for their criminal activities. The patriarch of the family was both prideful and cunning, engaging in fraud, extortion, and various other nefarious deeds to amass his fortune. During this time, a painter moved to the swamp with his wife and daughter, seeking inspiration and hoping to sell his artwork. This painter, named Roman, unaware of the Bevel family's dark past, quickly formed a bond with the young patriarch, who seemed to appreciate his talent. The painter regarded the head of the Bevel family as a confidant, never suspecting that he would later get him intoxicated during a dinner and imprison him. In their frantic search for him, Roman's wife and daughter wandered into the swamp, resulting in tragedy. His wife drowned, and his daughter vanished without a trace. From that moment on, the Bevel patriarch kept Roman captive, forcing him to paint exclusively for the family. The young artist endured humiliation and sorrow, filled with resentment as he created his works. After several failed escape attempts, the Bevel family sent hounds to guard him more closely. One fateful night, Roman completed his final work, Wrath of Cerberus. In a desperate act, he hanged himself in the very room where he had been imprisoned. On the painting, he left a haunting message. If I can curse this villainous family, I am willing to offer my soul to the demons in hell.
Once Roy finished telling the story, Holmes made a pointed remark in a suspicious tone, noting how Roy seemed to know an awful lot about the painting. Roy, unfazed, simply replied that his knowledge had nothing to do with the strange events surrounding Laverne. Holmes then approached the painting, examining it closely with a magnifying glass. He touched the frame, sniffed the surface, and after a brief moment of contemplation, made a surprising declaration. He had solved the mystery, not of Bevel's death, but of the supposed flaming dogs. With that, he instructed everyone to move to the reception room. As the group left, Celia lingered for a moment, intending to take a close-up photograph of the painting. However, Clovis abruptly stopped her, cautioning that close-range photography might damage the oil painting. Celia found his reaction odd. Despite the painting's notoriety, all existing photographs of it seemed to be taken from a distance. Though suspicious, she chose not to press the issue further, and instead followed the others to the reception room. When Celia arrived at the reception room, she found Wiggins already there. Wiggins whispered something to Holmes, who then had a brief conversation with Inspector Lestrade. Looking visibly annoyed, the inspector left the room with a constable. Holmes then turned his attention to Dahlia and asked why she was in the exhibition hall at the exact moment of the incident. Dahlia claimed she had heard Laverne scream and rushed to check on him. But Holmes quickly pointed out a problem. The exhibition hall was soundproof, meaning she couldn't have possibly heard anything from outside. Realizing her mistake, Dahlia tried to cover it up by saying she was just passing by because she had trouble sleeping. However, Lestrade soon returned with proof that made it impossible for her to keep lying. He presented Dahlia's old, dirty clothes, the ones she always wore to honor Bevel. These clothes had traces of a brown, powdery substance. Holmes explained that the substance was magic phosphorus, commonly used by magicians in circus acts involving flames. This material has a low ignition point, meaning it can catch fire easily, even from mild heat. And because it's sticky, it's incredibly difficult to clean off. Celia then recalled that Dahlia had visited a relative who was a magician, implying that she had obtained the substance from her relative. Holmes then asked Laverne what kind of light source he had used when entering the exhibition hall the night before. Laverne said he had carried a candlestick, and that was the final piece of the puzzle. When the candlelight reflected off the magic phosphorus, it would have made the dogs in the painting appear to be breathing fire, creating the illusion of a curse. Understanding what had happened, Laverne confronted Dahlia, demanding an explanation. Dahlia, now furious, snapped back, arguing that after years of loyal service, she deserved Bevel's inheritance more than Laverne. She had worked for Bevel much longer, yet it was Laverne who got everything. But there was nothing she could do now. Before she could protest further, the police restrained her and took her away, with Laverne following behind. Back in the reception room, Lestrade turned to Holmes and asked if Dahlia was also responsible for Bevel's death. Holmes denied it, explaining that Bevel's death wouldn't have benefited Dahlia. In fact, she had no reason to kill him. As for Laverne, Holmes clarified that Dahlia never intended to harm him either. She only wanted to scare him. That's why she had stayed nearby the painting, ready to help as soon as he cried out. Then, Holmes walked over to the half-finished painting in the room and took a closer sniff. Curious, Celia followed his lead and noticed a familiar scent: lilac. Holmes explained that lilac oil is often used in painting. Celia commented that someone as meticulous as Clovis wouldn't find it unusual to use lilac oil in his work. That's when she realized Clovis wasn't in the room with them. Roy then mentioned that Clovis was busy preparing the transfer documents for the upcoming art transaction. According to secret auction procedures, the highest bidder would collect the painting the next day. Holmes decided they should all return to the exhibition hall the following day. Lestrade, still suspicious, asked if the real culprit behind Bevel's death would be revealed soon. Holmes confidently replied that the truth would come to light the next day. And that wraps up the first phase of the Conan Doyle estate crossover story. Personally, I found this story quite interesting, even though I'm not really a Sherlock Holmes fan. I actually prefer Agatha Christie's works, but I still think this crossover delivers an engaging detective story that's easy to follow. So if you enjoy mystery fiction, I definitely recommend keeping up with it. The next phase will continue after the maintenance, so stay tuned for what happens next. This is your broadcaster, Silmina, signing out.